Introducing On the Horizon, a podcast by Horizon Resources Cooperative, supporting farmers and ranchers across Northwest North Dakota and Northeast Montana. Join host Levi Hall as he engages with agronomy experts, grain traders, and community leaders, sharing insights to help you make confident, informed decisions for your operations. From market trends to practical advice, we bring you the conversations that matter.
Welcome back to On the Horizon. I'm Dr. Audrey Carlisle, and in this episode, we're going behind the scenes with our host, Levi Hall. He also serves as our grain division head and COO. Levi's going to share his journey into agriculture, what makes him so interested in this industry, and thoughts he has on the innovations technologies our producers are going to be using in the future to drive their operational success. Let's dive right in and meet our host, Levi Hall.
When it comes to propane, Horizon Resources isn't just a service, it's your trusted member-owned cooperative. Our iconic yellow fender propane trucks stand for more than fuel. They represent safety, reliability, and a commitment to you. From heating your home to fueling your business, those yellow fenders mean you've got a reliable partner. Don't wait. Call 701-572-2171 or visit horizonresources.coop to schedule your propane delivery today.
Welcome to On the Horizons podcast. I am Dr. Audrey Carlisle, this week's guest host, and with me now is Mr. Levi Hall. Welcome, Levi.
Audrey, thank you so much for having me on. Longtime listener of the podcast. So, I appreciate it. I'm excited to be on this side of the desk.
That's right. Today I get to grill you. You're welcome.
Yeah. You've been on, I think you're a most recurring guest. So that's how you got tapped. You're probably the most familiar with everything. So excited to hear the questions that you and Jill have worked up, because I have not heard these yet.
Yeah. So here we go. Good luck. All right. Well, most of the time we start off with just an introduction. You can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you get started in agriculture. And just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. So I was born and raised just outside of Berthold, North Dakota on a small cattle operation. And I had always wanted to be a farmer. And it's just not realistic to grow up and think we're going to go buy 20 quarters of land and we're buy combines and tractors with the implement prices today. It wasn't feasible. And I realized that at a pretty young age. My mom's brothers all farm up in Bottineau County and kind of in that area. And so I knew that there was a lot of capital involved to get started, and it just wasn't really a feasible dream. And so the next thing that kind of happened was I went off to college at North Dakota State, and I was going to double major in agribusiness and marketing. And that was my goal. And so I did end up graduating from NDSU. I crammed my 4-year degree into 4.5.
Overachiever.
Yeah. And then I graduated with an agribusiness degree and then minors in animal science and finance instead. That marketing one switched to finance through my college career. While I was back my first summer, I came back home and I knew I needed to get a job, an internship. And so I interned at Dakota Agronomy Partners in Minot and enjoyed the agronomy side, enjoyed interacting with farmers on a daily basis. And I was in charge of the day-to-day in the warehouse. And so their office and warehouse were separated by a couple hundred yards. And so the farmers would get their invoice at the office and drive it down to me at the warehouse. And then it was my responsibility to get that loaded up properly. I was in charge of making sure we had totes filled. If I felt like we were getting low on something, I would relay that to the agronomists in the office. That was kind of my first year's job. Then I was fortunate enough or I had duped them enough where they had wanted me to come back for a second year. And that second year I was on a 4-wheeler for the summer. And so I was out crop scouting and learned a ton of practical on the boots on the ground type stuff. That first year was really instrumental in building that first exposure to chemicals and what chemicals were going out at what time. And so as somebody that was just paying attention, I would ask like, hey, I've noticed a lot more of product X is going out. Why are they using that now? They weren't using that 2 weeks ago. So I learned a lot about timing and the importance of it. just because I was being inquisitive. And then after church one Sunday, the general manager for Berthold Farmers Elevator, Dan DeRushi, grabbed me and said, you should really check out the grain side. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I'll give anything a shot. And he knew that math was one of my strong suits. And so when I came to work at Berthold Farmers Elevator for the summer, it was a good experience to get exposure and a lot more operational style exposure. I was the first intern they had ever had. So I, looking back now, see some of the growing pains they had with it. And it's stuff that I use today as we work through the implementation of our internship program and knowing when we are or aren't ready for an intern in a program.
Right.
And so I did an internship there. It was actually the year that Minot flooded. And so there was a lot of crop that didn't get put in that year. But I still was able to take some time and go learn from the people in the grading rooms and really enjoyed that. And then the most transformational summer, I went up to Argyle, Minnesota, and I worked for Market County Grain as an intern. And we had our general manager, Jim Fagerholt, and Kevin Moore was the merchandiser at the time. And we were a relatively young elevator. So the elevator had been built roughly 8 years before I showed up. So it was a brand new facility. And Jim turned 30, I believe, that year that I was there as the general manager. Kevin was probably 25 to 27. So the whole crew was young. It was a really fun work environment because it was kind of we're going to try everything once. And, there were a lot of things that other people probably didn't want to try because it was different. Nobody's ever done it that way. But we weren't afraid to just be like, let's throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And the really interesting part about that summer is 2012 is the year that there was a big drought and corn prices went up above $5 for the first time, probably ever. And I'll never forget that I was alone in the office on a report day because it was also the year that the Canadian Wheat Board had disbanded. And Jim and Kevin had gone up to Canada on a report day, which looking back was terrible planning. But again, probably goes back to a little bit of our cavalierness that we were running on. And they had gone up there to try and influence Canadian bushels to come down into the U.S. Because that was the first time those farmers were going to have the ability to market their own grain freely. And so Jim and Kevin were up there driving around, trying to make some connections. And it was a report day and corn went up limit. And I think I bought, 500,000 bushels that day as an intern. And I'm calling in the hedges. And so it was a great baptism by fire. So when I finished that internship, I went back to North Dakota State for my final semester. And I then took a job with Walsh Grain Terminal. So Walsh Grain Terminal and Market County Grain were both 50% owned by ADM Benson Quinn. The other 50% was owned by local cooperatives. So we got this really unique 1 foot in the co-op system, 1 foot in the private sector experience. And so I started at Walsh Grain Terminal, was there for about 2 years, had a great experience there, a really unique experience of getting a new facility built. And that's where I would say the most transformational thing, and people that are around me and talk to me about agriculture as a whole, I will harp on the fact, I won't just talk about it, I'll harp on it, that this is a relationship game. And that's where that was really instilled in me, because we had a faster facility, we had a better bid, and we still had a hard time competing with people.
With the customer side, or?
We had a hard time competing with the other elevators because to get the customers to come to us as a new facility was a hard concept for them to grasp, even though 50% of our ownership structure was local cooperatives who they had done business with.
So it wasn't pricing, it was loyalty.
Absolutely. It was 100% relationship. It was, they knew those people, they knew that they were going to be taken care of. And so throughout my career now as a full-time employee, that has been my focus, is that no matter where I go, the people understand that to me, the most important thing is that everybody's treated fairly. So after Walsh Grain Terminal, 2 years there, I went to Market County Grain, which was a fun kind of coming home experience after a couple years of growing along with Walsh Grain Terminal to come to an established facility who I already knew some of the customers from my internship. And I spent 1 year there, and I managed the corn position there. And we handled 20 million bushels of grain there. So in comparison, Horizon Resources handles 8 to 10 million bushels per year. So we were a solid 2, maybe even 3x some years on the handle. So it was a really fun experience with a lot of reps, and that's the way to get better. And then
when you say reps, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so just more trades.
More trades.
Yep. And so we had the ability, we were doing 2 trades for every trade that I do today out in Williston. Now, those trades looked very different than the trades I do today because that was all hedgeable commodities. So we were very happy. We had our risk was very limited, and we were able to take bigger positions that were more calculated, where now in a flat price commodity environment, you have to be a lot more careful.
So maybe just for audience sake, if they don't have a background in marketing, what do you mean by what's the difference between a hedgeable commodity, flat price commodity?
Great question. So a hedgeable commodity is wheat, corn, soybeans, anything that has a futures market attached to it. So when we're able to hedge that commodity, we're able to sell futures when we're buying grain. This will offset that risk. So then when we go to sell that grain, we buy those futures back. So that goes into your basis, is your only place where you have margin. Because any gain that you realized on the flat price side of it, you're going to offset with a loss on the future side. And conversely too, so if that price were to work against you and have loss on the flat cash side, your hedge will be in the money. So that's how that risk is offset. Where now with Durham, there's no hedging mechanism built. So any of the commodities pretty much that are grown out here, we're running those with a lot more risk than what we had there. Same general principles. You gain a gut feel for the market. That's all relatable. But your risk tolerance has to be higher to be out here. Or this industry would eat you up. So after Argyle, I went down to Beach, North Dakota. And down in Beach, I worked there for 5 years as a general manager. I had a great experience there. They took a risk on a young guy. And I was able to come in, and we had some really successful years. And I also got to be a part of one of the largest droughts that they've ever had.
Fun.
And so, yeah. So,
I bet the mood was great.
Yeah, it was a great way to cut your teeth, because you learn that no matter what in this industry, you don't control it all. You can control all your risk as much as you want. You can try and control employees as much as you want, but you cannot control weather at all. So to really get that and get that experience was great. Looking back on it in the moment wasn't great, but definitely was a growth point for me.
So is this general manager of an entire agronomy?
Correct. Yep.
So, and grain, everything?
Agronomy and grain.
Yeah.
Yep. And then we built a pulse plant while I was there also. And so, got some great experience, did a joint venture. So we had some investment, got experience doing that.
Was that your first big infrastructure project?
Yeah, that was an $11 million CapEx project, capital expenditures. And so that was the largest project I had done to date. And it's a plant that Beach Co-op now owns wholly and is quite successful. So,
and that's an area where pulses are pretty big. So that's
very big.
Major asset.
One of the homes of the founders of Pulse USA. So, it's been an area where it's been driven home how important those are. In September of 2019, I had a Durham trader ask me if I was interested in moving to Williston because the job had just opened up here. And I laughed at the guy. And
Oh, come on now.
I did, yeah. That's the truth. I didn't think he was serious. I didn't know much about Horizon Resources, didn't know a lot about Williston. I, at that time, was looking to leave Beach Co-op and had 5 years of GM experience and was really searching in that GM CEO market. And was kind of running into a weird roadblock where boards and recruiters weren't really sure how to view my experience because I was substantially younger than most people applying for those jobs. But I also had more experience than a lot of people applying for those jobs already at that level.
Because of all the internships that you've done over your college career.
The GM experience. So I already had 5 years of GM experience where I was going up against 45-year-olds that had no GM experience. But they had been division heads or merchandisers for a long time. And so it was this really odd space that I kind of found myself in. And then a recruiter eventually asked me, would you look at Williston? Which was kind of funny because it was a full circle moment because I'm like, I feel like I've been here before, Groundhog's Day, where someone was asking me about this. So this time I said, well, I'll look at it. So I took the opportunity to kind of hear about the job from the recruiter, and then they lined up an in-person interview with Jeff Wagner. And I drove up here, and he and I sat in his office for, I think, 4 or 5 hours. Wow. And we just visited. We got to talk a lot about our experiences as general managers, CEOs, and got to talk about working with boards and, my career goals and where I was going and, stuff like that. So it was a really fun interview for me. I think Jeff would tell you the same thing today. And so we hit it off quite well. And Jeff and I found a way to make it work. And so May 15th of 2020, I accepted the job up here.
You brought the drought with you, didn't you?
Yeah.
2020 was, and actually, 2021.
In 2020, so I didn't move up here until July 1st.
We can still blame you for it, though.
Well, it's funny because actually the day that while I had accepted the job, I kept getting reports about it's not raining up there. It is dry. Yeah. It's dry. And the day that I was moving, we were unloading the U-Haul and it started raining on us.
Just a tease.
Yeah, exactly.
That was it. That was all the rain.
Well, how about that? So I said, well, maybe it'll change.
No.
It didn't. Yeah. But we still had the 2019 crop in the bins with a lot of falling numbers issues, but we were able to market that. Yeah. So for a lot of years, the grain division really kind of had some struggles and some problems here. And we've been fortunate enough where the crew has really bought into a lot of the ideas that I brought. And a lot of them go back to Jim Fagerholt and the guys at Market County Grain. Jordan Sinclair, who's been on this podcast, was there with me. There were a lot of crazy things that we tried and a lot of crazy concepts. And we've found that a lot of them have worked and they've been successful for us. And so for the guys to be able to buy in and trust that, sometimes we're going to take positions that might look a little weird to them, but there's a foundation, there's logic. Ethan and I do a lot of research. We're not just, taking positions on a whim. So yeah, all that stuff kind of culminated here in Williston. And then after 3 years of being here, that's when Jeff Wagner asked me if I would like to be the chief operating officer of the cooperative and help a little bit more on the day-to-day side. And that allowed me to have a little bit more exposure to the rest of the company, specifically the energy side where I didn't have a lot of experience before, and the retail side. So that brings us to today. And that's how I got to where I am. But I grew up in a cooperative family too. My grandma worked at Farmers Union Oil in Berthold for her whole career. My dad climbed poles for Vrendry Electric, based out of Elva. The cooperative system runs in my blood. It's something I'm very proud of, and it's definitely a passion of mine.
So looking back at kind of your internship experiences, it seemed like those were really vital in you figuring out what you like to do. And as you said, getting these crazy experiences that you took even to your role today, where you got to experiment, you got to play around, and now you're having the wins because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it laid the foundation where, I got to experience spring in an agronomy center. So now in a senior leader role at the cooperative, I know that going down on May 15th and asking John if he wants to go take 3 hours to go out for, a drive, or, if he just wants to go to a conference at
I'd like to see you try this. This would be very entertaining for me. So feel free.
Yeah. So, I mean, just common sense things like that. And also, learning that sometimes when you call a farmer, you have to listen to how quick their responses are, what types of responses you get. There's times where they are very busy and things are not going well. And part of that is growing up with, agriculture, right? And so I knew that there were times where the tractor didn't work, and that was the day you avoided dad, right? It wasn't the time to run around and ask him if we can go get ice cream in town, right? So some of that common sense stuff that comes from my upbringing, but the internship happens at such a transformational point in your life where that's really your first quasi-adult job. And so to have that responsibility where, they were going to give me a list of fields to check in the morning, and then the agronomist and I were going to go out, but we might park and drive different directions. But we were expected to meet back at that trailer at roughly the same time. And, keep in mind, while I'm doing this, I've got a flip phone probably, but cell service isn't great because, cell phones are they're around, but they're still pretty primitive compared to what we have now.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't have a camera on my phone. So there was no taking a picture of a weed and bringing it back.
Yeah. Things have changed a lot.
Yeah, a lot, which is exciting. And I love it, because I love being able to see it and say, wow, the advantages that these interns have now to gain knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
What can they be setting themselves up for?
Right.
I think that's phenomenally exciting.
Yeah. So, you did internship in agronomy, but then you switched over to grain.
Yeah.
How did you know that was what you really liked? Because it seems like, marketing and hedging, that's a finance degree.
Yes.
That's not necessarily an agriculture degree.
For
so
sure, yeah.
They don't necessarily go hand in hand.
Well, first of all, Dr. Bill Wilson at North Dakota State University is one of the world-renowned ag econ professors, and his emphasis is on grain marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely had some exposure there. But, when I was a kid, I remember going out into the garden and picking cucumbers and going in and selling them for 25 cents a piece. And so I was always a little bit of a wheeler dealer. And my mom loves
Levi's lemonade stand.
Yeah, exactly.
$1 a cup.
Yep. It's always been a running joke in my family that, if I get something for free, I'm going to find a way to make a profit on it. Or
don't buy Levi's couch.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You're going to overpay.
Yeah. So, it's always been, a funny joke. And, my wife and I have a son that's a little over 1.5 years old. So we're watching a lot of Mickey Mouse Clubhouse right now.
Oh, I remember that.
And Pete, who I don't know what exactly Pete's character is supposed to be, but he's always an opportunist. And I always joke with my wife that makes him my favorite character because, if Mickey and his friends are driving by, Pete's going to have some reason that they have to pay a toll in jelly beans or, it's always... And I told my wife, I said, Pete would be one heck of a grain merchandiser.
I know what you're dressing up for Halloween next year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're going to have Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, and Pete. So yeah, anyways, it's always been a passion of mine, the faster pace, especially at Argyle where, when you're doing 20 million bushels a day, during soybean harvest, we were dumping 430 trucks a day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't have like a slow day was 100 trucks.
Wow.
So it was such a different pace, and I just loved it. There was so much to do. We were always buying, always selling, and it just really fueled that passion for it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've definitely found an appreciation for the different style of merchandising that happens in Western North Dakota, where we don't have as many bushels.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be more strategic. And I was told one time a good trader knows when to sit on their hands and be bored.
That's tough, huh?
Yeah, it is. So it really takes that sense of discipline. And so it's been fun learning that side of the coin too.
So what is a day-to-day out here in Williston for you now in your dual role?
Yeah. Well, the dual role adds a complexity to it. First of all, Ethan Klunt has been a phenomenal hire. Ethan takes a lot of pressure off of my day on the farmer-facing side. And I don't think a lot of people realize the amount of effort that making a sale and lining up the freight takes, but that effort is amplified when we're doing single cars. And when we're doing our canola, that's how we're doing all of it. So the amount of effort it takes through the grain division and to run trucks, it takes a lot of effort to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, still getting you contracts in so you can match those up with your sales contracts. There is a lot of work there. So Ethan Klunt handles a lot of that, which takes a lot off my plate. So that allows me to really monitor all of our sales. So Ethan handles our canola sales, yellow pea sales, anything kind of onesie twosie is what we call it in the business, where you're doing
Here in Williston.
Yep, absolutely. So anything where we're doing 1 or 2 cars worth, that's what we call a onesie twosie business, right?
It's got to have a cute name.
Yeah, exactly. It's fun to say. And so Ethan handles all of those commodities wholly, and he's earned that through his experience and everything, and he's done a great job at it. And then I still handle all of our Durham sales, and Ethan and I work together on our spring wheat stuff. And so I still have a very good pulse on what's going on the Durham sales side. And I work closely with Sandy Applegate on still doing some of the farmer assemblies. I'm trying to push a lot more of those to Ethan so he understands, when we're waiving discounts, why we're waiving them, how we can work with the farmer as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So Sandy handles all of the grain accounting side. So obviously still I'm very involved with that portion. So that's how my grain involvement kind of is to date. I still worry about our freight costs, timing of trains, to an extent. Some of that kind of falls under the day-to-day that goes to Ethan.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the COO side, wherever there's a fire, you'll find Levi not far away.
That sounds like a really fun job.
Yeah, hopefully after the fire, after the fire, and not before. So I oversee our insurance, which is a blast. I oversee our safety, and I oversee our marketing. And so anything that's kind of falls in that bucket of it touches all the divisions, but there's not really one home for it, kind of falls under me. Our salesmen. So Nathan Richardson, John Van Avery, they report to me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's allowed me a little bit more time and exposure into those other divisions. And then I also work pretty closely with Pam and Kendra down in HR, mainly because of the belief that the chief operations guy needs to make sure that we have enough people to pull off the operations.
Mm-hmm.
And so being part of that recruiting process and being part of who are people, where are they at, which people need to be promoted, which people need to be critiqued on their performance, that type of stuff. And so I really try and give some of that feedback back and be a liaison to the division heads, which has been one of my favorite parts, is being that kind of Swiss Army knife for the division heads, where whenever they have a problem or something, they're able to call me and I can look at it from a different lens. There's been times on the retail side where I've come to Chad, and it's happened on agronomy too. And I've said, well, what if we tried XYZ? And it's kind of like, well, wouldn't have thought about that. And it goes back to that Argyle thing where not everything we did was commonplace in that industry. And so bringing in that fresh perspective and saying, let's try something new. So it's been really fun. It's a unique job. But yeah, a lot of my time is sucked up with safety, insurance, marketing, big non-P&L type roles that touch the entire company.
Yeah. Just make things run smoothly.
Yeah, exactly. I was told one time, or there's a book called Rocket Fuel, and it's about a CEO-COO relationship. And they talk about the CEO's job is to set the vision for the cooperative. The COO's job is to make sure that the trains arrive on time. And so my job is to execute the vision that Jeff Wagner lays out. And so he and I work on that, and he gives a vision and I poke holes in it and tell him why it won't work, which is funny because it's very anti my personality. I'm very much a positive, we can do anything if we put our heads to it type of guy. But my job now is to tell him we can't do that and here's why. But most of the time I come to him and say, I think we can do that and here's how we will do that. And, so it's the execution side. And then I work with that division head and say, let's execute this.
And this is all locations as well. And is this a new role?
It is. Yeah. Horizon Resources didn't have one before. So yeah, it's been a great experience. I absolutely love my job.
Yeah. Sounds like you kind of got to make up what your job was too.
To an extent, yeah. I mean, I certainly would not have said I would love to take over insurance. I don't think that anybody walks in on day one and says, give me that,
Yeah. But it was a need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of these were falling either to Pam in HR or Jim Radke as the CFO. And so it really kind of centralized that and allowed them to focus more on their jobs, which has been an added benefit to this.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. So, big picture, you've got your hands in a lot of things. You're talking to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Probably have a good sense of how our members are feeling right now about the ag economy.
Yeah.
What are the big problems that, we're looking towards in the future that we want to kind of tackle?
Ethan's grain prices are a big problem. I get to blame him for those, right?
God, Ethan's the worst.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't mean that.
So yeah, Ethan's grain prices is the joke that, that's the problem. The grain market is certainly softer right now. And we've had big production across the board. And that creates a lot of hurdles, and we're still coming off of 2021's high prices, honestly. So we've really kind of hit what I feel on the grain side has been probably the lows for a while, unless we see a really wet spring. I hope we do see a wet spring. I'm not overly optimistic, but I also think there's some big hurdles in the global market right now. Mexican durum has problems to it. So there's going to be some opportunities out there for guys. So I'm cautiously optimistic for our local growers. The lentil market's still very strong. So I think that there's still some really good opportunities for 2025 for guys to be able to make a profit still and keep the wheels turning on the operation and keep marching forward. It's definitely going to be a time where people have to be prudent with their spending. I think that anybody with cattle or livestock of any nature right now is going to be in a great spot. So I think we're going to see some livestock showing up at places that haven't had livestock for a while. We're going to see some old barbed wire pulled tight again. And that's exciting. I'm a big proponent of livestock. I love that industry. It's where I grew up, is where my foundation is. So obviously I've got a spot for it. But yeah, I just think that we're going to see some people really get to the point where they're going to have to maybe try some things. A lot of people used to do custom trucking on the side.
Yeah.
So our guy's going to start doing some of that to diversify. I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. I don't think we're quite there yet. But I do think that livestock production would be one that I could see some people getting into and dipping their toes into and having 50 or 100 mama cows around, rather than leaving that back couple pastures open or renting them out, So I think that there's some opportunities there, but there's no doubt that the price of nitrogen just still has not come down. And that's a huge hurdle with these commodity prices where they are. And a lot of that goes back to the fact that king corn is still a little bit too high, which anybody that's in the I states is, if they hear this, will tell me I'm crazy that it's too high, but it's certainly propping up that nitrogen market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely some headwinds there.
Absolutely.
But hopefully people will stick to their rotations.
Yes.
We definitely can't go all in on lentils. That'll be a headache moving forwards. So
I will say this, in my experience traveling around from location to location, you find that you kind of have the same thing, just with different names at each location. And the most successful farmers I've ever had spend money on their agronomics. And so to me, the last place that I would start cutting is agronomics.
Yeah.
Right. Find a way to do better marketing, even if that means that you have to sell in off-peak times like April or May, and you might have to pay for a trucker. But the big thing that we're seeing also right now is operating lines are 7-8% versus 5 years ago they were 2.5%. That's a huge difference. So you look at your cost to carry 1 bushel of durum per month, and it's going to be 3 to 5 cents per bushel. Well, that adds up pretty quickly if you put that in the bin in August and you wait until June to sell it.
Yeah.
So there's 50 cents right there, plus the cost of putting it in and pulling it out. I think that people are just maybe going to have to look at their marketing plans a little bit closer, a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And think about some of those hidden costs.
Well, you talked about getting into cattle. That's definitely not something around retirement age is going to do. So these are like our younger producers who are looking into that. What do you think are the most important things they should be thinking about right now, if they're starting out their career?
So the young producer, in my mind, the most successful producers, I always love grilling them and asking, how did you get to where you are? And one of the most successful livestock producers I ever knew said, I always swam upstream. And so when the market's booming, like we've got right now in cattle, he was selling his herd down. And so he was capitalizing on that, taking the cash. And then when the market will correct in 2 to 3 years, he'd have this slew of cash that he would go in then, and he would buy twice as many cows back for the same money.
Yeah.
And so, so there were a lot of interesting philosophies like that I've picked up over the time. And I'm not saying that's right for everybody. To me, debt management is such a huge thing. And I think everybody gets swept up in an auction. I give one of my buddies that works for a big auction house in North Dakota a really hard time because every time they sell land, they say that, this is the last time this piece of ground will ever come up for sale. And he says, well,
Scarcity,
it probably is,
works.
Right? And I said, yeah, it probably is. But next year, the quarter next to it is going to be for sale. And next year, the one 2 miles down the road will be for sale. So I think to take a step back, take a breath, and realize not everything is the last one that you're ever going to see like it. And now there's exceptions, right? Like the home quarter. If you've got a quarter of ground that's right on your house, that's probably worth something. So there's things to consider outside of that, but I would say patience in realizing that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I've seen a lot of operators that have gone from 4,000 acres to 7,000 acres, and they did a worse job farming 7,000 acres than they did at 4,000 acres. And so they ended up money behind.
Yeah.
And so sometimes there's value into not being the biggest, baddest farmer out there. And so I think some of that patience and humility and knowing that, There's times when the iron is hot and times when it isn't. And I know it always feels like it's hot and it always feels like it's the one you got to buy. But I promise you, I used to be a really big victim of it with cattle genetics. And I would always be like, oh my gosh, this is the last time they'll ever offer genetics on this cow.
Mm-hmm.
It might be. She might tip over dead.
Right.
And one of her daughters will be for sale next year. And there will be a better cow from a different operation that's got genetics for sale. And it really kind of allowed me to say, okay, you don't have to bury yourself right now for immediate gain. Sometimes pumping the brakes a little bit and saying no to an opportunity is the right option. So that's my advice is just try and be prudent because, at 7% interest, some of the stuff will really sneak up on you fast.
Yeah. But do buy 100 head of cattle.
Yes.
Immediately.
Right now.
Getting us back to the podcast. I'm hosting today.
Yeah.
So that you can kind of share, your view on the podcast, what we did in season 1, and then what's coming up in season 2. This podcast was kind of a shot in the dark. You've been doing weekly episodes. I mean, that's a huge investment. What are your big takeaways on season 1 and what do you hope people got out of it?
I'm glad that you brought that up. So the weekly episode, and like I said, I have not seen any of these questions, so they're all surprises to me. The weekly episodes was something that I felt strongly that we needed to do because if you're going to do a podcast, you need to be consistent with it. If it's an inconsistent news source, you lose traction very quickly. So to me, it had to be a consistent amount. We talked about doing every other week. We talked about doing monthly. And really what we settled on was we felt with the size of cooperative that we have and the connections that we have throughout the industries that we're involved in, that we would have no problem filling a weekly commitment. And there have been times where it's been a little nip and tuck or, deadlines get stretched. It's certainly been a growing experience. But I think one thing that we haven't talked about a lot on the podcast, we've talked about it off mic with a lot of people. We're not afraid to batch record is what it's called. Mm-hmm. And so this week we're going to record at least 3 podcasts. It's a slower time of year. We don't have growing conditions to report on. I'm not calling you in to talk about fungicide and the effectiveness and timing windows. And, we're not hitting that because we're in a weather cycle. It's really an off-peak time. And so we're able to kind of do that where we'll bring in 2, 3, 4 people in one day. And it's not much of a time commitment for me then because this is another thing that's been added to my my schedule, right? So, we're able to do some of those types of things, which I think going into season 2, we're going to have a much better feel for what's going on. We were joking before we started this podcast when you were saying, how do I introduce Levi? How do I do this? And I said, it's just always off the cuff. And as a planner, I know that was something that you maybe didn't appreciate as much.
Next time I can wing it.
So, it's been a great experience. I've certainly learned a lot through doing this podcast. I hope the listeners have learned some too. And it's a great experience just sitting down with a bunch of our employees a lot of times and getting to have this relaxed conversation with them and allowing them to show their talents without them feeling like I have to prove to a customer that I know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And we're able to break that down into a real conversational mode so that people just are able to say, I do know what I'm talking about. Here's what it is, X, Y, Z. Mm-hmm. And that's been just really rewarding. And I've enjoyed having the employees that we've had on the podcast for sure.
Yeah. And, I think as someone who's listened to the episodes and who is relatively new to the company at the time, it was a really great primer and background on what everyone's doing. Yeah. So as a resource to employees, it's really valuable.
Yeah. And I hope our patrons feel the same way that, I hope that this breaks down a little bit of that barrier. They feel like they know me a little bit through this podcast. Mm-hmm. And so if a patron, whether they're a new patron or an old patron, they're able to call me and say, hey, I have a question about equity. And I know that you talked about it on this episode where you had Pam Strummy on.
Mm-hmm.
Great. What do you got? Let's talk about it. I know I have a question about the financials, and you and Jeff Wagner talked about them. Yep. Let's talk about it. I have a question about agronomics. Sure. I might be able to answer some of it, but for the most part, I'm going to kick you to John and the team. But if I can be that gateway to help that patron get in the door and help them become active, that's just an added perk.
Mm-hmm. So you've had a good balance, I'd say, of, people we work with, people at Horizon, that kind of thing. Do you have a favorite episode?
Well, I think Jeff Wagner's episode right away was one of my favorites.
You can't say that.
Yeah, and not just because my employee review is coming up. Yeah, no. I think it's actually one of our most listened to episodes also. And I can see why. It was a really fun episode to talk about the history of Horizon Resources and talk about the 2023 fiscal year. We're going to have an even more fun episode this spring when we get to talk about the 2024 fiscal year. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just, as somebody that's so passionate about cooperatives, I think that one really stands out. But I don't know if people understand some of the industry people that we've had on and how hard some of them are to pin down for a 20-minute phone call, let alone for them to come on an hour-long podcast.
Yeah.
And so I am super appreciative to Jason Schwantz for the episode that he did. Mm-hmm. That man has a full plate. And to be the number 2 guy in energy, roughly, that's at CHS. That's a big job. And so Jason, to take that time and come on and talk with us, that was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. So that one's definitely high up on the list. Paul Bukowski, his episode, I had a lot of comments from traders within the industry that were like, you and Paul did a phenomenal job on that episode explaining the global trade and how it works. Mm-hmm. And so that one was definitely top of the list. So those are top 3 for me, I think, off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Of course, any of them that you've been on is
obviously, except for those.
Yeah,
except for those ones. Those are actually above the top.
Conflict
3.
of interest. I figured I couldn't bring those
It's
up.
all right. I understand.
Yeah.
All right. So we are in season 2.
We are.
All right. So what's coming up? What should people look out for?
Well, like I said, we're very off the cuff.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. And that's fun.
Not helpful.
Yeah. It's fun though, because we can do whatever we want to do. And that's the beauty of between Jeff Wagner and the board. They've given a lot of freedom to this podcast to be able to cover the topics that we cover. And so if the patrons have something that they want us to cover, reach out. Give me a call, give me a text. My office is at 317 2nd Street West, where the agronomy office is.
Facebook page.
Yep, Facebook page,
channel.
Or contact us on the website, anything. Let us know if there's a topic, and then we'll do the homework to find somebody that's an extremely competent individual and bring them on, because odds are I am not competent in whatever they want to know. So would love to bring on anyone and everyone. So if you guys know of somebody, we'll certainly try and get them on. But, we have a list of people that we think would be good podcast guests. We still would like to get probably a couple of the high ups at CHS on. And I think that all we have to do is ask, honestly, and we just haven't done that yet. And so before you go to that level, like I talked about, with Jason Schwantz, to be able to get 20 minutes, let alone an hour, as you go up that ladder, it only gets more difficult.
Yeah.
And so, I really want to make sure our ducks are in a row and that we have the production down to a point where we're very comfortable, and we've got the ability to really roll that out. But I do have confirmation from a few of the CHS national directors that are probably going to come out for our annual meeting this spring. That they would love to sit down and have a conversation with us. So I think that's going to be one where we could have 3 out of the 17 board members for CHS Inc., which would be a pretty cool get.
Yeah.
So yeah, just some of those types of things that we're working on. But like I said, it's very off the cuff. We don't have a lot of them plugged in yet. So if you got something, let us know.
Yeah, that's a good point. A podcast that's interactive with its audience is going to stay relevant, and commenting even on wherever you get your podcast from, leaving a rating and review. I really like these topics.
Yes.
These were great. We'll know what to target the episodes towards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been great.
It has been great.
I'm not sure I like this side of the mic, but I guess once a year I could learn to put up with it.
Yeah. Well, you did a great job hosting, Audrey.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to On the Horizon. If our conversation today sparked your interest, make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Stay connected by following @Horizon Resources Co-op on Facebook and Instagram, and explore the world of agriculture with us. We're excited to continue bringing you real conversations with Horizon Resources industry partners, member owners, and employees, discovering more about your local neighbors and community friends. Until next time, keep looking towards the horizon.
Horizon Resources, solutions for your success.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be used or considered as an offer or a solicitation to buy or sell commodities. Horizon Resources does not make any representation, warranty, or guarantee as to the completeness, accuracy, timeliness, or suitability of any information contained within any part of this podcast. Horizon Resources does not accept any liability for any loss or damage, including without limitation loss of profit, which may arise directly or indirectly from use or reliance on such information. Whilst the information provided has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, Horizon Resources does not attest to its accuracy or completeness. Horizon Resources reserves the right to change any source without restriction or notice. The information herein is indicative only and is subject to change.